Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are.
Welcome, everybody. It's time for the Books That Make You show. I'm your host, Desiree Duffy, and today we're talking about books that make you want to read horror poetry. This time of year, it makes us want to curl up with something scary and revel in the season of spookiness. We often think back to, or at least I do, of some of the most memorable pieces of poetry this time of year, like Edgar Allen Poe's The Raven. Horror poetry is something that sparks our imagination and fuels our lust for all things that go bump in the night. Our guest today is Stephanie M. Wytovich. Did I get it right?
You did. You got it.
She's from the Horror Writers Association. And they release a poetry showcase that features poems from an array of writers. And it is the perfect read for this time of year and beyond. Now, the Horror Writers Association's 9th annual poetry showcase is what we're talking about today. But they've been doing this obviously for 9 years in a row-ish. So we'll find out all about that. And it features the best in never before published dark verse. So when you're reading this, you're reading stuff that hasn't been released anywhere else. Now, this book, this one is edited by Angela Yuriko Smith. Now, this year's featured poets, among others, are our very own Stephanie, who's with us today, as well as Geneve Flynn, Naomi Simone Borwein, plus dozens of other talented members of the Horror Writers Association. Now, Stephanie, who's with us today, is an American poet, a novelist, an essayist. Her work has been showcased in numerous magazines and anthologies, such as Weird Tales, Nightmare Magazine, Southwest Review, Year's Best Hardcore Horror Volume 2, The Best Horror of the Year Volume 8, as well as many, many others. She is the poetry editor for Raw Dog Screaming Press and is an adjunct at Western Connecticut State University, Southern New Hampshire University, Point Park University, and she is also the recipient of the Elizabeth Matchett, did I say that right? Matchett? Mm-hmm. Memorial Award and the 2001 Ladies of Horror Fiction Writers Grant, and has received the Rocky Wood Memorial Scholarship for Nonfiction Writing. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure because I love horror. I love poetry. So this is the perfect combination, especially for the fall and even going into the holidays, because Christmas kind of has some dark undertones for it as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So this book and, everything that evokes, let's start there. Why do you think it is that we like scary stuff in the fall, this time of year? What is it about being scared that draws us in?
For me, I always think that horror is kind of this perfect playground for us to experience fear, but in a safe environment. Like, we can watch other people on TV going through these horrifying situations, and it kind of helps us turn our own anxiety off, which is always much appreciated. And then we get that adrenaline spike too when we go to haunted houses or when we go to like actual haunted places. That kind of, that fuels us and keeps us going and makes us feel alive. So I think those are two big draws to horror in general. And then there's also something cozy about it too in the fall. Like, I know, I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily like a seasonal reader, but I do start craving certain types of stories around Christmas and Halloween specifically. I want my Ray Bradbury out. I want cozy witch stories. Like, I want to kind of just settle into the fall as the world starts to like quiet and shut down, and kind of fill that with my reading too. So I think there, a mixture of one or even all of those things kind of help us just kind of settle into the season.
Yeah. And there's something familiar and traditional in many ways too I know, for example, every year I have to watch The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's like
Yes.
it kicks off the season.
Absolutely. It's so funny you said that because I just finished, I have all these books that I have to be reading for class. And when I saw that, what is it? Long Live the Pumpkin Queen, the sequel to Nightmare Before Christmas. When I saw it came out, I was like, well, everything else is, going to the side and I have to read it. And I listened to it in like 2 days. So I'm here. It's wonderful for what it's worth. I'm definitely reading.
Good to know. Good to know. So how about if you tell us about the Horror Writers Association Poetry Showcase? So this is volume 9. It's obviously been out. This is the 9th year. Is that it?
Yeah.
I know you did not edit this one, but you've edited one of the past versions and your poetry is in this one. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I've been involved with this showcase for quite some time now. So I've edited the past 4 volumes of it. Prior to that, I've sat as a guest, and then I've had, or a guest judge, and then I had some work published previously to that. So I've been kind of around with the showcase for a while, and I think it's a really great resource for poets. I think it's a great resource for readers who are looking to incorporate more horror poetry or just poetry in general into their life. And I think it's a really great place for people to experiment with their writing. The nice thing about the showcase is, I loved a good themed anthology. I think they're so much fun. But I also think it's kind of great that the showcase doesn't have a theme, because then it lets you try different things with your writing and different things with the genre. And so I always was very careful to encourage maybe people who don't normally even write poetry to try giving it a chance. So we've had a lot of fiction writers over the year who have, tried their hand at poetry. And it's kind of like this nightmarish playground to just kind of run amok and, and to be scary and experiment and try new things with writing. So, the showcase is really, I think it's grown into something really beautiful over the past couple of years. As it's gotten more attention and more people are learning about it and submitting, we're just getting such a great array of writers, both familiar, both, that have been in the field forever. And it's just proving to kind of substantiate how big poetry is actually getting. I think there's definitely been this movement and this uptick for speculative poetry within the past 5 or 10 years. And I like to think that the showcase has helped, nudge that along a little bit.
Absolutely. I gotta say, I love the visual I got of running amok in a horror playground. That was awesome. I was like, oh yeah, I want to go play on that playground with Stephanie.
Always, you're invited.
I love that. So tell us how people can submit. I mean, obviously this one's being released, but if somebody is an aspiring horror writer, aspiring poet, do they need to be a member of the Horror Writers Association? How does that submission process work?
Yeah. So at this point, and in the past, you have to be a member of the HWA because it is an HWA sponsored showcase. If that will change in the future, I don't know. I would love to see like the HWA showcase, and then I'd love to just see more just poetry showcases in general. But for right now, it is member based. And usually how things have run the past couple of years is the submission call usually goes out around April when we celebrate National Poetry Month. And then it usually runs the past 2 times it's been about 2 months. And so at the end of May is when submissions will close. And then the judges will, collaborate and corroborate on some things. And then they give the TOC out like later in the summer. But it's usually, it's usually always in April. And then prior to April, which is really nice, is there's usually a post that goes out that talks about the judges. And if the editor is looking for anything specific, and that's all funneled through the HWA blog. And typically whoever is the editor usually does something on their blog as well. So it's good to just kind of watch the HWA space. And the dark poetry blog that they have for all kind of information at the beginning of the year. And then right around spring is when those floodgates will kind of open for creative submissions.
I love it. And do you get a lot of submissions?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I was really excited. I'm not sure what the numbers looked like this year, but I know last year we got close. We either got close to or just over 200, which was the most that
Wow.
I had ever gotten as an editor before for the showcase, which is exciting because it means more people are reading, more people are, getting excited about poetry. And that's what's important to me because I feel like poetry has a bad rap. I feel like people get introduced to poetry very young and it either feels like too sing-songy and rhymey and they're like, not really my thing, or it feels too elitist and it feels inaccessible. And I think that there's a place with speculative poetry to kind of ride the like middle line of that where it can still be, it can still be academic and it can still be literary and it can still have all the elements of genre that we like. And so I think, with more people submitting and getting excited about poetry again, that's what the showcase is about. That's what we want. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, what can you tell us about specifically some of the poets or poems that are in this showcase? Any that you want to highlight?
Yeah. So I know you said, can you read me the three poets that you mentioned were being showcased specifically?
Yes, you are the
Okay.
first one on the
Okay.
list.
Okay. Sorry, that wasn't like a me reaching for a moment.
No, that's okay. And we also have Genevieve Flynn and Naomi Simone Borwein.
Okay.
Wayne. Not
So
sure if I'm
I
saying it right.
actually I don't know Naomi's work, which is really exciting because now I'm going to be getting a new poet, for this. So that's exciting. But Genevieve, I've read her stuff before. And I've actually showcased some of her nonfiction writing on my blog. So I'll be very excited to kind of read her work. And I know that she has worked with Angela, I think, in the past on some poetry, along with like Christina Singh, and Lee Murray. I believe they have an anthology out, the Tortured Willows anthology. I think her work is in there. So I think we're getting a very diverse approach to poetry, which again is exciting because I think for a while, at least when I started writing horror poetry, I felt like I was getting a lot of like very, very dark, gothic, like Edgar Allen Poe-esque stuff. And that's kind of all that I thought horror poetry was, which was still exciting to me because I was a rascal little like emo child who wanted all of that. But, as I got older, I started kind of craving more. And when I started seeing a lot of when I got more and more involved with the HWA, and I was seeing this push for like diversity and inclusivity, and it was just opening like this huge world of horror and different monsters and mythologies from different countries. And like it was really exciting. So I'll be excited. I saw a little bit of that last year when I edited volume 8 specifically. And so I'll be curious to see how that's kind of explored and expanded upon in this next one. Especially as we get new writers, which is super exciting.
Yeah. And that's an exciting thing because, and you're touching on something too, that I'm going to circle back to being a member of the HWA in this community, because you're gaining friends and cohorts and co-writers and people you might collaborate with even beyond what the showcase is. And I think that's one of the benefits that sometimes, especially new writers, they might not realize that there's this whole network that they can tap into.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because so I teach in 2 MFA programs. And then I went to an MFA to get my degree. And I always have people asking me, especially my undergraduate students, if it's necessary to get an MFA for writing. And I think that depends. It's a whole conversation for another time, but it really depends on the individual. But for people who aren't sure if that's the route that they want to go, organizations like the HWA are a gold mine of information. I mean, they have mentorships, they have showcases, they have membership only anthologies, not to mention like a ton of resources and conferences and like virtual online classes. Like there's so many resources. And that's not even including the networking opportunities like you talked about. I feel like I've met the most incredible people since being a member with the HWA. They've given me tons of opportunities. I was like, we talked a little bit about grants and like scholarships and stuff like that they've opened. I got editorial experience with the showcase. Like the list just, I mean, it goes on and on. So it is a wealth of information and resources for writers. And it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Now, tell us a little bit about your specific books and writing as well. Now, you have a book that is called Writing Poetry in the Dark. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So that's coming out October 18th of this year. I'm very excited about it. And it was kind of one of those examples of like, you have to write the book that you want to read. And I've never, so I like when I went and got my MFA, I got it in fiction. I didn't get it in poetry. But that was when I started reading a ton of craft books. And I noticed that there weren't any craft books for speculative poetry. There's a ton on just regular poetry and on poets on poetry and stuff like that, but nothing specific for speculative poetry. And, as I was teaching and mentoring and like doing all of this stuff, everybody would always ask me, and I'm like, all right, well, if one doesn't exist, like I'm going to do it. And so I rounded up a bunch of my pals and, writers and colleagues and stuff that I really admired their work and have learned from myself. And I started, we kind of had a conversation about what to write and include the work, include in the book to help speculative poets, people that have been writing poetry for years, people who maybe don't even know what speculative poetry is, people that are kind of interested in it. So it kind of breaches all levels of writers. And so that will come out, like I said, about mid-October from Raw Dog Screaming Press. And I hope that it provides a lot of comfort and explanation and discourse and just like general excitement again to kind of fuel this, this turn to poetry that we've been seeing in the past couple of years.
Yeah. Now, as somebody who is a teacher and a mentor and a writer yourself, what advice, do you have any tips, words of wisdom that you want to drop on those people out there that are listening or watching right now on YouTube going, wow,
Yeah,
I think I could do that. What do you want to say to them?
Yeah. So I feel like my advice always sounds like very cliche, but it's been a very hard pill that I've had to learn to swallow over the couple of years. So my threefold advice is become really good at time managing. So if you need a planner, if you work by a calendar, whatever you need to do to get organized, like that is first and foremost. If I don't have my planner, which is literally 2 inches from me right now, I have no idea where I'm supposed to be, what deadlines are coming. So it's a great way to kind of get organized. The second piece of advice is don't be afraid to say no. So when I first started out, I said yes to every invitation, every conference, everything that fell into my lap. And it was good because I got a lot of experience very quickly and I wrote a lot very quickly, but I also burnt out very quickly too. And creative burnout is not fun and it's not something I would wish on anybody. So make sure that you're taking care of your mental health as well as, your dream goals too. There has to be a nice balance to it. And then the third piece that I would recommend is I think it's really important to write for yourself and write because you love it. It's easy to kind of get caught up in what everybody's doing. It's easy to be like, oh, I wrote this book and it didn't end up on the New York Times bestseller list. Like, now what am I going to, like, it's very easy to kind of fall into imposter syndrome and get frustrated very quickly, especially because publishing moves really slow. But so I think it's important that like, you're not writing for anybody else. You're not writing to trends. You're not writing to publishers. You're writing stories that you want to write that fulfill you, because then no matter what happens afterwards, you've still done what's most important to you and your art. So those are kind of where I always try to steer people when they're getting started, or if they just need a reminder like I did, halfway, into their career and stuff like that.
Great advice. And yeah, I mean, we tend to want to, and maybe it's because we visualize the idea of a writer, a successful writer. Okay.
Oh,
I'll kind of do the air quotes. And people don't realize that even the most successful writers, and we can even just go right into the world of horror, like it wasn't an overnight success. It wasn't, here's my first book and I've hit it. It takes time. It takes time not only to get to that level, to get to that readership, to build that fan base, but also to build up your craft in many ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's also, like, you kind of touched on this idea of a writer. And I certainly fell into this like very hard when I started out, where it's like, especially as a poet, because you get this idea of like the suffering poet for their art. And it's like, you can only make poetry if you're sad or if you're angst. Like, and I mean, with horror writers, like when people would meet me, they'd be like, oh, you're like happy and you can talk to people. And I'm like, well, I'm not like living in a hole in my basement. Like, I don't have to be that in order to write what I'm writing. And so I think that like getting rid of expectations and stereotypes and stuff like that, like you don't have to be sad to write dark poetry. You can be happy and write dark poetry. Like horror isn't one thing. It can be anything and everything depending on how you see it. So I think that's important too.
Yeah. And just speaking of horror in general, taking out the poetry aspect, there's so much exciting stuff happening with horror just in general. I mean, you know, when we go to the movies and the books that we read, there's so much more diversity and equity and inclusion happening, which is awesome. And people are exploring dark aspects of the human experience in so many exciting ways, don't you think?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And the other thing that I really love about horror that I feel like, I think it's kind of gone through phases, but I think we're in one now, is where there's this celebration of the weird. Like people aren't afraid to get weird again, which is exciting because weird isn't always trendy. It's not always like a safe bet in like, you know, mass market publishing and stuff like that. But we're seeing like more weird, like outsidery fiction now, which is super exciting. And I know like Josh Mallerman is one of my favorite weird writers, and I hope he won't take offense and yell at me next time he sees me for calling him that. But like his work is just so delightfully different, and I just devour it. And I love that about it, because I don't feel like I'm getting, again, like the same types of stories over and over. We're getting all these like delicious spins on like the Gothic with like Mexican Gothic, or like different takes on the vampire with House of Hunger and things like that. Like they're all different, and they're not afraid to shake things up. So it feels a little like anarchist too, which is exciting. I like that we're going places that we may have not gone a couple years ago.
Absolutely. And we mentioned it earlier. When people think of horror, they think of Edgar Allan Poe. Nothing against Poe and the Raven, because he
love him.
Brought us probably to this point. There he is.
Sitting on my desk. No shade to him whatsoever.
Not at all. But like so many things, horror as a genre evolves along with people and society. And I guess for anybody who's thinking that horror kind of falls into these very specific tropes, you know, it's, oh, the horror movies. I don't want to watch horror movies because it's always the same formula.
Right.
And that's exactly what you're saying, is it's not that way anymore.
No. And it's even the stuff that is like a safe bet, like slashers are even being completely redone. The Final Girl is being revisited. Stephen Graham Jones has like changed the face of the slasher like industry and horror, you know, for in amazing ways. So even the safe bets aren't safe anymore, which is great. Yeah.
Nothing is safe.
Nothing is safe. It's the best part. Everything's a threat.
I love it. I love it. Oh, you're fun. You're fun. We're going to have you come back again sometime.
Yes.
Okay. So we got a little bit of time yet. Can you talk about, let's circle back to HWA. And can you tell people where they can go to find out more about HWA, especially if they're interested in possibly joining and being part not only of the next showcase, but every other thing that HWA has to offer?
Absolutely. So the first thing that I would do is recommend going to the HWA's website, which is horror.org. I would also kind of bookmark their dark poetry page, because that's something that they'll update all year with different different poets, spotlights. They'll talk about the HWA Dark Poetry Scholarship. So there's tons of information that you can get there. The other thing that I would recommend is as you start digging around on the website and getting to know the poetry scene a little bit more, to follow your favorite poets on social media, because I know honestly, that's how I find out about so many things, because you see what everybody else is doing. You see magazines that they're publishing in that you might want to start reading. They'll make recommendations on different poets that they're reading. It becomes this like giant spider web of information. So I think that's kind of where I would urge everybody to start, and kind of, curating their social media towards poetry, if that's something that you're interested in exploring.
I love the metaphors that you use, the spider web of information. You are such a horror writer.
I know. All of my metaphors are dark. My students yell at me for it all the time.
It's great. I love it. And I'll give a shout out to StokerCon as well, which if anybody is curious about, there's writers conferences. Okay. And there's book festivals and events, but there is nothing comparable to StokerCon. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that really quick.
My God. StokerCon is a blast, first and foremost. Like if you want to get into horror and you want to get into writing, StokerCon is the place to be. Just point blank. And if you have questions about it, it's actually going to be held in my hometown next year. So yay for all the Pittsburgh people. So we have the HWA Pittsburgh chapter. All of us are like very excited and willing to talk to anybody who's interested about it. So you can always, find us and reach out to us on social media and we can talk about it. But it's a blast. It's networking, it's panels, it's film, it's comics, it's everything spooky, with all the spooky people who like see you and understand you and are just like excited alongside you. And that it's contagious. Like it's inspiring to the upteenth degree.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I will see you then in Pittsburgh, because I'm going to be there this year.
Wonderful. That's
and
awesome.
The last time I went, I mean, we kind of had a weird thing with, COVID and everything. But prior to that, when I went to StokerCon, it was on the Queen Mary, which for those of you who might not know is like the most haunted ship in history, I think. It's in Long Beach. And I was hanging out with like George R.R. Martin. And so, yeah, I can attest to the fact that it's always just this network, this fun. They have the Stoker Awards and you're with all of these really cool, awesome people like Stephanie. So very much endorse that. Okay. So Stephanie, where can they go to find out more about you online? Find your social media and your books and your website.
Yeah, so if you type in my author name, Stephanie M. Wytovich, pretty much anywhere, my website will come up. My blog, which is Join Me in the Madhouse, will come up, and I talk about a lot of poets there, so that's a good resource to check out. My social media handles are SYtovich, so you can find me there. I also have a horror bookstagram page under the Haunted Bookshelf, where I talk about spooky poetry and books that I'm reading and teaching in my classes. But I'm very friendly to Google. So if you just pop my name in, it'll show up.
Awesome. I love it. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was a blast.
You bet. And thank you everybody for joining us on the Books That Make You show. You can find out more about us on our website. That's booksthatmakeyou.com. And you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget, we're on TikTok as well as on YouTube. Subscribe, ring the bell, leave comments, because the YouTube algorithm likes that kind of stuff. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The host and executive producer of the Books That Make You show is Desiree Duffy. Sound mastering and engineering by Dave Napox. Social media and content promotion by Siddhi Jahagirdar. Copywriting and editing by Mike Robinson. The Books That Make You show is an award-winning podcast produced by Black Chateau Enterprises.